Hello, welcome to the Old Testament Made Simple, lesson number 8. I can hardly believe that we've been doing this for 7 weeks already. Hopefully we'll make it to lesson number 12 and have this complete series for you on videos so that folks in the future, we can make reference to this and they can be able to watch it as well. But today we are doing lesson number 8. Again, I want to thank Melton, the author of this material, for his insight in making this study available to us and allowing us to use this study. Our goal is to make 8 trips through the entire Old Testament to give us a skeleton view of the Old Testament. We've been working toward this over 7 weeks now. We've made 4.5 trips so far. Our first trip is, of course, the geographical moves of the children of Israel. The second is the 20 key people of the Old Testament. The third is the 3 major divisions of the Old Testament. And the fourth is the 11 books that cover 95% of the story of the Old Testament. And then last week we started remembering the contents of each of the books in the Old Testament. So we will pick that up in our study today. So first of all, we're going to start with labeling our map. Now we're going to skip the making the room a map. We're going to go straight to labeling the map. So Jason has volunteered this morning to label our map. So stand over a little to the side and label our map for us.
Okay.
This body of water?
Persian Gulf.
Okay. The city just to the north? The land around the room?
Fertile Crescent. Mediterranean Sea.
Mediterranean Sea? Egypt. Israel. Moab. And the land in between? Desert. Very good. Now let's do the rivers. The Jordan River goes from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea in Israel. Very good.
Tigris.
The Tigris is the river to the north.
Euphrates.
The Euphrates is the river to the south in the Fertile Crescent. Very good. Now let's name our locations. When the children of Israel came out of Egypt, what body of water did they cross?
Red Sea.
The Red Sea. Moses stopped and got the 10 Commandments where? Mount Sinai. The children of Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years and then went to this place before going into the promised land. Moab. Very good. Now, who was born in this city and what is its name? Abraham. And that's the city of Ur. When he moved, where did he move to? Haran, up there in the north. And the children of Israel were in captivity in a place whose king was Nebuchadnezzar. What's that? Babylon. Now, tell us where it all began. Eden. Very good. All right, let me have the one. Good. Very good. All right. So we have all of these places labeled. You didn't have to go away. Come back. Jason's now going to take us through the 7 major moves of the children of Israel from creation until about the time of Jesus Christ. All right, move number 1. Eden to Ur. Move number 2. Ur to Haran. Move number 3. Don't hit the TV. Haran
to
Israel. Very good. Move number 4.
Israel to Egypt.
Good. Move number 5.
Egypt to Israel.
Good. Move number 6.
Israel to Babylon.
Move number 7.
Babylon to Israel.
Very good. Good job. Jason has taken us through our 7 major moves of the children of Israel, and he's named the geography of the Middle East. I hope that you're getting to the point now that these things just kind of roll off your tongue. You can lay in bed at night with your eyes closed and see all of these things happening. If you can do that, you're keeping up with your lesson material. If you can do that, you're gaining that skeleton view of the Old Testament, and that's very, very important. All right, the 20 key people. Anne-Marie, I had talked about you doing the books, but do you want to attempt the 20 key people? I'm putting her on the spot.
Can I use my notes?
She wants to use her notes. Come and try it without your notes. You don't have to guide it. I'll guide it, but I'll help you, and we'll go through the 20 key people. Okay, when we're looking at the 20 key people of the Old Testament, we divide them up into sections. There are 6 key people in Genesis. What are the 6 key people in Genesis? First would be Adam.
Then Abraham.
Nope, there's one.
Noah.
Noah. Very good. Then Abraham.
Then
Isaac.
And
Jacob.
And
Jacob's son. Coat of many colors.
Joseph.
Joseph. Very good. Awesome. All right. Now, Israel's 11 leaders. Now, these are the people that led during the tribal period. First of all, who led the children of Israel out of Egypt? 10 Commandments. Moses. Very good. Now, there was a young man that came up after Moses who was the next leader and a general. What was his name? He was one of the 2 spies that came back, Caleb and Joshua. Very good. All right. Now we went into a period of time, 400 years, where the children of Israel would sin and that whole big cycle. Who were the leaders during that period of time?
The 12 judges.
Yay, the 12 judges. Very good. Now the last judge and a prophet, who was he? Samuel. Very good. Now we enter into the kingdom period when we name the rest of the leaders. Who was Israel's first king that Samuel anointed to be king? Saul. Very good. Who was the second king? David. Very good. And his son and the last king? Solomon. Very good. Now, after the death of Solomon, the kingdom split into the northern tribes, 10, which was Israel, and the southern tribes, which was Judah. And we had a number of kings that would be over the divided kingdom. How many were there? 39 kings of the divided kingdom. Very good. Now, after the kings, Israel was defeated, and Judah, the southern kingdom, was carried captive to Babylon. When they came back, they had 3 more leaders. Do you remember the 3 leaders after they came back from Babylon? A long name.
Nebuchadnezzar.
Nope,
No, that's the Babylonian king.
All right, yeah. It's a little hard. Zerubbabel.
Yeah, I don't know these.
That's all right. Zerubbabel was the first leader after the Babylonian captivity. Zerubbabel, Ezra, and then Nehemiah. And Nehemiah helped to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Now we have the other 3 out of the 20. Who were the other 3?
Pharaoh.
Pharaoh. Very good. Nebuchadnezzar.
And
the 5 major and the 5 minor.
Prophets.
Yay! Good job, Emery. Yay! Emery did a great job. I hope you're beginning to kind of get a gist of these individuals. As we go through, it'll just help you out. All right, now we have the 3 major divisions of the Old Testament. That forms the H. So we have 17 historical books. We have 5 poetical books. We have 17 prophetical books. The 17 historical and the 17 prophetical are divided into 5 and 5. The first 5 are called what? The Pentateuch of the historical books, and then we have 12. The first 5 prophetical books are called what?
The minor prophets.
The first 5 are the major prophets. and the other 12 are the minor prophets, okay? So you have major and minor prophets. All of this is the three divisions of the Old Testament. Now, if we're going to name the historical book, the 5 books in the Pentateuch are what? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Good. The other 12 historical books are
Joshua,
Judges,
Ruth,
1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah. Yay! Now these books, as we've said before, these are the historical books. Now, let's name the 5 books of poetry. That's the first book.
Esther.
No. Nehemiah. Job. Oh, Esther was the last book of the historicals. That's my bad. We left poor Esther out. Caught me red-handed there. All right. So now let's name our 5 poetical books. Job. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. There you go. All right. Caught me. Here we go. Now let's do our 5 major prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. Very good. These are our 5 major prophets. Now the other 12. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Wow! See how much easier those are rolling off your tongue than just singing the song. Now they're beginning to make sense. Except we left out Esther. How did we do that? So here we go. We've got our books of the Bible in hand. We're getting better with those. Now, we're going to look at how to remember the contents of the 17 historical books. Now, the 11, with 95% of the story, is Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Joshua, Judges, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Now, remember, if you take this list of books, you'll have 95% of the story of the Old Testament. I encourage you to write that down somewhere in your Bible so that when you're trying to understand the story of the Bible, you look at these 11 books. Because if you do that, you'll get a good, clear picture of the story of the children of Israel almost till the time of Jesus Christ. So I really want you to understand those 11 books are the most important books for the history of the children of Israel. And then there's the other 6, Deuteronomy, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ruth, Esther, and Leviticus. Now, as we're looking at this particular list, we want to, and if I can find my place, and I've turned off of it, we'll just go from right off of our memory and see how far that we are able to go with this this list. I want to start with Genesis, and as we look at the book of Genesis, we want to tell me a little bit about this book.
Creation to captivity.
Creation to captivity. All right. Captivity where?
In Egypt.
In Egypt, right. So you have Genesis covers everything from the beginning until the death of Joseph in Egypt. What's the first 5 words in Genesis?
In the beginning.
In the beginning. What are the last 5 words in Genesis?
In a coffin.
In a coffin in Egypt. Very good. Those are the beginning to the captivity in Egypt. All right, very good. What do we find in the Exodus?
Leaving Egypt.
Leaving Egypt. Mass departure. The children of Israel coming out of Egypt. What main character would we expect to see in Exodus? Moses. And? Who was the king of Egypt?
Pharaoh.
Pharaoh. So the main characters would be Joseph and not Joseph, Moses and Pharaoh. Now in Genesis, who are our 6 people in Genesis? Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Very good. So that gets our people in these 2 areas. Now, what's going on in the book of Numbers?
It is the process of them going from Egypt to Israel.
They were going from Egypt to Israel. They spent 40 years in the wilderness. 2 things happened in the book of Numbers. One at the beginning, one at the end. They took a census of all the people. Very good. They came out of Egypt in the Exodus, could have gone straight into the promised land. They chose not to, and God sent them into the wilderness for 40 years. The older people died, the younger people came up, and so that all occurs in the book of Numbers. Now, in the rest of these, it goes along the name of the leader that is involved. So Joshua tells about what? Joshua, his leadership, his conquest of Canaan. The Judges tell about the 12 judges. 1st and 2nd Samuel tell about who? 1st Samuel talks about Samuel and the reign of Israel's first kings. 2nd Samuel talks about what?
Him finding David.
David and David's kingdom. Very good. 1st Kings talks about what?
King
Solomon and the division of the kingdom. 2nd Kings talks about what? The other kings and the divided kingdom. 1st Kings is going to talk about Elijah as a prophet. 2nd Kings is going to talk about Elisha as a prophet. All right, the book of Ezra is going to talk about Ezra and one other character. Zerubbabel. Very good. And this is going to pick up after the Babylonian captivity as they go back to the promised land and begin to rebuild the temple and everything that was destroyed by the Babylonians. Good. And then Nehemiah talks about
the return.
Nehemiah is the last return of the children of Israel back to Jerusalem and to the promised land, and the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. Okay, so reestablishment of the government there in Israel. Now, these are the summary books. Deuteronomy summarizes what? The law. Why did it summarize the law?
Because it was the priest's book.
No. Deuteronomy was the summary of the law. Moses had to reteach the children of Israel before going into the promised land. Why?
Because it was a different generation.
It was a different generation. The older generation had died. The newer generation needed to know what to do. And so Deuteronomy reteaches the law to the 2nd generation. Very good. Now, 1st and 2nd Chronicles basically do what?
Summarize those two.
They again summarize the kingdom period. Very good. They summarize again what happens here with the kings. And so it gives us a little bit more of an in-depth study of the kings all the way down through the 39 kings of the divided kingdom. Now, Chronicles is different from the Kings for one particular reason. It only names the kings of Judah, the southern kingdom. So Chronicles leaves out Israel's kings and only tells you about Judah's kings. So that's how you can help to remember Chronicles is just the lineage of David down through his kingship, okay? So that's important to know and important to understand. Now these 2 books, Ruth and Esther, what would we find in those 2 books?
Biographies about them.
Biographies, the story of Ruth and the story of Esther. Very good. Now Ruth, how do we kind of remember Ruth?
That phrase that you said.
What is that phrase that I said?
Withers, thou go, I'll go, Esther.
Whither thou goest, I will go. Ruth told Naomi that she would go with her wherever she was going to go. Naomi was in the land of Midian. They had fled famine in Israel, moved to Midian. Her sons were killed. Her husband was killed. She was left with Ruth, a daughter-in-law. And so she told Ruth to go back to her family, move back in with your household, remarry. But Ruth chose to go with Naomi back to the promised land. So she said, whither thou goest, I will also go. Now, Esther, tell me about what I would find in the book of Esther.
When she talked to that one person and she says, if I perish, I perish.
If I perish, I perish. Very good. Esther was a queen. She became a queen to one of the Persian kings in Babylon during the Babylonian captivity. She was responsible for saving her people. The celebration that the Jews still celebrate today of Purim was because of Esther and Esther's story. So Esther was a queen who saved her people. She risked her life to go before the king and to appeal for her people. And she was able to save her people. So this book, Leviticus, what would I find in the book of Leviticus?
The priest's handbook.
The priest's handbook. Now you can use the priest's handbook. What was the tribe that God chose to be the priest?
Levite.
The tribe of Levi. Okay? So Leviticus, is the priest's handbook and guides the priest through what they need to do. All right, very good. So that's our 17 historical books and how to remember those books. So I hope you begin to grasp what's in each book, and so you'll be able to know what's going on in the story, where to find certain pieces of information. It'll really help you. This will give you that skeleton framework to start with. All right. Now, today we're going to continue with a quick way to memorize or know the contents of the remaining books in the Old Testament. We're going to start with the 5 poetical books: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Solomon, and Ecclesiastes. All right, Job. We know Job was the man that suffered. He was the man that had great wealth, and God and Satan had a conversation. Satan told God, said, if you will remove the hedge around Job, which was his success, his family, his possessions, all the material things that Job had, Satan said, if you'll remove those material things, Job will curse you, God, and he will depart from you. And God knew that would not happen. So what we find in Job is the problem of human suffering. Why do good people suffer? You'll read that all throughout the book of Job. Job was a righteous man. He did nothing wrong. But horrible things happened to him. So we need to understand that just because we're a Christian and just because we're close to God doesn't always mean life's going to be a bed of roses. What we need to understand is that humans suffer. We're in a cursed world, a sin-cursed world, and there's going to be suffering. And the book of Job helps us to understand that. So if you're trying to know what's in Job, think human suffering. That's what you'll find in the book of Job. Now, the second book is the Psalms. The Psalms give us an anatomy of the parts of the soul, our inner being. David was one of the writers. Solomon, one of the writers. Different ones sang the songs in the Psalms. And they pour their heart out to God within the Psalms. And so there's an in-depth understanding of the soul in the book of Psalms. It's a mirror reflecting every possible movement of man's spirit. So if you think of your emotional state and your spiritual state, as you read through the Psalms, you find all kinds of poems and songs that help you to understand the soul, and it mirrors man's looking at God. And David was great at writing Psalms, and Solomon also. And they just poured their heart out to God. They saw God as their refuge. They saw God as creator of heaven and earth. Their soul, their very being, reached out to God. And we see that poured out in the Psalms. So you have an anatomy of all parts of the soul, a mirror, looking within at the movement of man's spirit. You'll find that in the book of Psalms. Proverbs, we see understanding and practicing wisdom based on God's law. If you want a lot of instruction on how to do things, you will find it in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs, their chapters are lined out where sometimes one complete thought is in one verse or two verses. So as you read one verse, two verses, that's where we get our one of our mottos at church: train up a child in the way that he should go. When he's old, he will not depart. That's a proverb. And you'll see those all throughout the book of Proverbs, practicing understanding and practicing wisdom. So if you want to understand things, you want to know how to do things, look at the book of Proverbs. It's a great book of God's wisdom and little quick phrases and quick sayings. As you begin to read through the book of Proverbs, you'll be surprised how many proverbs you know because they are common in our society. Common phrases. So you'll find those in the book of Proverbs. Song of Solomon. A lot of people wonder why this book is even in the Bible. Because it talks about love. It talks about love of human hearts and God's love for his people. So as you study the Song of Solomon, it's a love story. Solomon pours out his heart. He talks about young love. He talks about the relationship between a man and a woman that are in love. So a lot of that information you're going to find in the Song of Solomon. And you can see the same relationship play out between God and human beings as between the character Solomon describes, the man and the woman in the book of Solomon. So you can see a lot of really good information in this book, even though the book almost was not included in the canon because it doesn't have direct statements of God, but it's indirect statements of God. So, love of human hearts and God's love for his people, the love book, the love story. So you'll see that in the Song of Solomon. And then in Ecclesiastes, you solve the riddle of man's existence. This is a very interesting book, the book of Ecclesiastes. You find the chapter, there's a time to live, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap that it was planted, a time to sow. All of those things you'll see in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's solving the riddle of man's existence. And Solomon goes into great lengths to describe and to talk about things in the book of Ecclesiastes. So kind of know that Ecclesiastes is solving the riddle of man's existence as we go. All right, those are the 5 poetry books. I hope you can begin to kind of see and understand what you will find in the poetry books. Now, for the remaining books, there are 17 prophetical books. There's the 5 major prophets and the 5 minor prophets. Now, during this period of time, if you look at every one of the books, every one of the prophetical books, the best way to remember is to know when they preached and to know to whom each book is directed. We know that the prophetical books are sermons. We know that they were preached to people either in Israel or Judah. All of these books revolve around the Babylonian captivity. Okay? So it's very important that we see the when the book was written and the to whom the book was written. Because when we can do that, we can better understand the prophetical books and memorize the prophetical books. Okay. The when. Okay. When did the sermon occur? When did it take place? All 17 of the prophet's messages revolve around the Babylonian captivity, or what is called the exile. Okay? So all 17 of the prophetical books occurred around this one event, the Babylonian captivity. Now the children of Israel, if you remember, move number 6 is from Israel to Babylon. Move number 7 is from Babylon back to Israel. So all of these occur between move number 6 and move number 7. Between move number 5, move number 6, move number 7, all of these books were written. Okay? Now, the last 3 major prophets were during the exile. Okay, so I want to look at that, and then we'll bounce back to this slide. 5 major prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. Of these 5, when we look at when did they occur? These occur during the exile. Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Okay? So when we look at the when, during the exile, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Okay? Now let me go back. The last 3 minor prophets are after the exile. So after the children of Israel come back to Israel, move number 7. After move number 7 occurs, the last 3 minor prophets were written then. So we have in our minor prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah. The last 3, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, were written after the exile. Okay? Now, if you want to take your Bible, I would almost encourage you to do this. If you take your Bible and go to your page that has all the books of the Bible listed for you, that you go to very quickly to know which book you need to look up and find, and I'm not going to find it in my Bible. I should have, because my Bible has all this study stuff first. But if you look on your contents page at the beginning of your Bible, you will find a listing of all the books of the Bible. Okay? When you find that page, what I want you to do is put you a line or a circle around these 3 books, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and write out in the margin after the exile. Okay? Tiffany's got her Bible up, and mine's got all this study stuff. And you really won't be able to see, but a lot of you have a list of your Old Testament books, kind of like this. It's just a listing of the books. Find, and you'll want the one that has them listed in order. Find Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Put your little mark there with those 3 verses, and write in the margin after the exile. Okay? And then we'll go back a slide. In your major prophets, you've got Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Draw you a little line from Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Put you a little line there. And write during the exile. Okay? And that way you will know in your Bible this information. During the exile, for Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. So where would I have expected these books to be written? Where was the person, and where would that book have been written?
In exile? In Babylon?
In Babylon. So Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel was written during the exile, okay? Possibly even written while the children of Israel were in the Babylon or shortly thereafter. So Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel were in Babylon. Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi were after the exile, after the children of Israel had come back to the promised land. Okay, now let's go back to our main slide. All the rest, okay, all the rest of the prophets preached their sermons before the exile. Okay, so the when, all the rest were before the exile. Okay, so we have the last three major prophets during, the last three minor prophets after, and everybody else before the exile. So if I said, when was the book of Isaiah written? Before, during, or after the exile?
Before.
It was written before. Very good. Daniel?
During.
During. Very good. Haggai?
After.
After. Very good. So now you begin to have a skeleton framework of when these sermons were preached. Okay? And knowing when they were preached helps you to know what was going on while they were preaching that sermon. Okay? It'll really, I promise, help you. A preacher will start preaching in the next few weeks about one of these books, and immediately in your brain you'll begin to say, well, that was before the exile, or that was after the exile, or that was during the exile. And so you'll begin to understand where that sermon is coming from. And you'll know kind of what's going on. And it'll really help you better understand the book. Okay, now we've got the when. Now let's look at the to whom. Okay? Now, if I preach a sermon at Waldrop Church, my sermon is directed to the members of Waldrop Church. If I go to Haleville and preach a sermon to the city council, my sermon is to the city council at Haleville. And so if you know who I'm preaching to, you can better understand what I was preaching. Okay? So it's important for us to know to who the prophet was preaching. Okay? This is very important. So the sermons of all but 5 of the prophets were to the southern kingdom of Judah. How many good kings did Judah have? Out of 20. They had 8 good kings. How many good kings did Israel have? 0. Isn't it interesting to note that God did not even try very hard to reach the nation of Israel? He sent most of his prophets to the southern kingdom of Judah. Why do you think he sent most of his prophets to Judah?
That's the one he chose.
That's the one he chose. That was the lineage. But it was also because he thought they would hear. Okay? They would hear the message. So they got more prophets than anybody else. All right. Now the remaining 5, all but 5, to Judah. Okay? The 5 that did not preach to Judah spell the word Jonah. Okay? So remember the word Jonah, and we'll learn the 5 prophets that preached to somebody other than Judah. So if you learn these 5, you'll know who everybody preached to. Okay? Out of 17. You only have to learn 5, and then you know where all 17 preached. Because all but 5 preached to Judah. So let's learn these 5 that did not preach to Judah. And they spell the word Jonah. All right. So very good. The first one is Jonah. All right. J for Jonah. O for Obadiah. N for Nahum, A for Amos, and H for Hosea. Okay? So these 5 books, out of the 17 prophets, only these 5 preached to somebody other than Judah. Okay? So if you learn these 5 and who they preached to, anybody else preached to Judah. Okay? So that's the way we want to learn it. Jonah preached to whom? I'm not going to show you.
Nineveh.
Jonah preached to what city? Nineveh. Did he do it willingly? No. Our vacation Bible school this year is going to focus on Jonah. And Jonah is a very popular character, swallowed by the whale because he refused to obey God and do what God wanted him to do. But he was preaching to Nineveh. Nineveh was a city in Assyria. Assyria was the nation that would destroy Israel. God even sent prophets to this nation trying to save this nation from his wrath. And that's interesting because God even gave them an opportunity for salvation. And they were the ones that were going to oppress his people, the nation of Israel, the 10 tribes in the north. All right. So Jonah preached to Nineveh. Let's get down here. Nahum also preached to Nineveh. Okay? So Jonah and Nahum both preached to Nineveh. And that's how we can remember that. Now, Obadiah preached to Edom. Remember that land right in the desert before we went into the promised land? Moab? The Edomites were right down from there, okay? That right under that city. Moab, the children of Israel. Edom was the land that refused passage to Israel on their journey from Egypt. The Edomites made them go out a separate way. So just south of Moab, the land of Edom, and the children of Israel couldn't go through there. So Obadiah was to preach to the land of Edom. And he did preach to the land of Edom. Now, the last 2, Amos and Hosea, preached to the northern kingdom of Israel. Okay? That's interesting to me. God only sent 2 prophets to preach to the nation of Israel. 19 kings. And God only sent 2 prophets to preach to them. And sent all of the others to Judah. God knew that Israel was stubborn and would not hear what he had to say in his message. And he only sent 2 prophets to preach to them. Amos and Hosea. So, if we know this right here, Jonah, Obadiah, Nahum, Amos, and Hosea. If we know those 5 books, who they preached to, Jonah, Nahum, Nineveh, Obadiah, Edom, Amos, and Hosea, Israel, the rest preached to Judah. All right, very good. That's it for this week. Next week, we'll look at God's 7 major covenants with man, and we'll begin to learn the 7 major covenants. Have a good week.